Kenya's government has frozen the accounts of 13 money transfer firms suspected to have links with the Al-Shabaab insurgents in Somalia. Now, this move, of course, has thrown up quite the storm here in Kenya and also in Somalia, where its economic impact will be most keenly felt. We'll be examining that issue and plenty more tonight in this edition of Global Business Africa. Thank you for joining us. I'm Ramanyang in the Kenyan capital, Nairobi. Here's what else is coming up. Robert Mugabe makes a historic visit to South Africa. We'll be reviewing trade ties between these two neighbours. And tour operators in Uganda adjust as ticked off as the Kenyan counterparts because of travel advisories issued against their country. Let's start with the lifting of sanctions against Iran. Now, companies, of course, that do business with the Middle Eastern country are pretty relieved that sanctions are likely to be lifted altogether. You see, last week the United States and Iran announced that a deal had been arrived at with Iran over that country's controversial nuclear program. As Sumitra Naidu now reports, however, MTN in South Africa is likely to be one enormous beneficiary of this deal.
U.S. sanctions on Iran first started in 2001. They were later intensified, leaving Iran almost cut off from the rest of the world. South Africa, too, came under pressure to stop doing business with Iran.
After 1994, diplomatic relations had improved. Iran was one of the few countries, of the first countries that South Africa established full diplomatic ties with. And relations between South Africa and Iran have been very cordial, both on a bilateral basis, South Africa, Iran, and in terms of part of the non-aligned movement, where South Africa and Iran usually take similar positions.
Apart from the relationship, the sanctions left South Africa with more financial woes. As a major importer of Iranian oil, South Africa's long-standing agreements and discounts had to be stopped as the U.S. piled on the pressure.
They stayed in Iran despite all the challenges that they had, all the criticism that they received from many stakeholders. And right now with these negotiations, it could turn out to be the best investment they ever made.
A sigh of relief for South Africa as the West abandons its tough measures. For years, telecommunications giant MTN has been struggling to repatriate its dividends and collect on its loan repayments.
South Africa previously received around a third of its oil from Iran, and it basically suspended that around about 2 years ago. This will then continue. So Petro SA would have a big relationship. MTN, your Cecil, would be able to reinvest in the liquid nest LNG sector. And other companies, South African construction companies, would play a big role.
The easing of sanctions will now allow MTN to access that money. It will also lead to stronger mobile growth in that market as Iran is reintegrated into the global financial system and increases its international trade. Sumitra Naidu, CCTV, Johannesburg.
Now then, let's talk about the lead story we have tonight. Kenya's moved to freeze the accounts of individuals and companies that authorities here claim are suspected of links with Al-Shabaab. The Kenyan government earlier today, of course, froze the account of those particular individuals. They cited the Prevention of Terrorism Act of 2012, and the Inspector General of Police named 85 institutions and individuals in a government gazette notice dated the 7th of April, and he says they're believed to have connections with the Somali militant group Al-Shabaab. Now, among those listed are 13 money remittance firms focused on the Somalia market, including Dahabshil. That's Africa's largest single remittance company. Now, earlier this year, the U.S. suspended Dahabshil remittances, citing fears about breaching anti-money laundering and terror financing regulations. Now, the list also includes Mohamed Kuno, aka Gamadere, whom the Kenyan government believes is responsible for the massacre that took place at the Garissa University College, in which over 148 people were killed. 4 transport and bus companies are also listed as entities believed to be associated with Al-Shabaab. Under the law, these companies have 24 hours from the date of the Gazette notice, that's the 7th of April, to make representations to the Inspector General of Police and provide evidence as to why they should not be declared a specified entity under Kenyan law. Let's get some more analysis on what's going on and what effect this will have, of course, on remittance recipients in Somalia. Abdinur Mohammed Ahmed is a business analyst and he joins us in Mogadishu right now. Mr. Ahmed, walk us through your understanding of what happened. How exactly did the Central Bank of Kenya communicate this suspension or cancellation of licenses to the 13 affected companies?
Thank you for having me on this program. And if I come to your question, based on the information we are receiving from remittance companies like Dahabshil, Tawakal, and Juba Express, they are claiming they have been notified at night and given a 24-hour ultimum to respond that from Kenyan Central Bank. That seems to me unprofessional in business-wise, because they were supposed to communicate and tell them their position in the banking hours. So communicating at night is to the hawalas who are legally operating in Kenya and has been licensed by the government of Kenya for a longer time, since the government of Siad Barre collapsed in Somalia. Hawalas were the only informal way of sending money, Somalis from diaspora. And also, not only Somalis, there are other communities in East Africa like South Sudan, and Kenya itself used to have this kind of informal hawala services. So it was pretty somehow and not to the standard of the business, while the government of Kenya, especially Central Bank of Kenya, was supposed to handle this case diligently, and giving 24 hours in your customers or client is something hawalas were expecting. Indeed.
The timing of this action, this regulatory action, really can't be a coincidence, especially in the wake of the Garissa attack. Did either the central bank or the inspector general cite specific actions that prompted their actions, or is this just a blanket statement? Your licenses are suspended and that was it?
Yes, I think it's a coincidence. It's not, it cannot be said a coincidence, because you can see that this kind of decisions are not taken seriously, and it has been taken out of the context, because it was based on emotions. When the Garissa attack happened and more than nearly 150 people has been killed, the only way they can paralyze Somalis, not Al-Shabaab, because Al-Shabaab is not benefiting from the hawalas. And hawalas were meant to transfer money from overseas Somalis expats who are going to help the Somalis back home or in Kenya, because not only Somalis in Somalia are suffering this kind of closure of remittance companies, but also there are millions of Somalis in Kenya who are Kenyans who used to benefit receiving money from an outside world. So it is not a coincidence. It was engineered after Garissa attack.
Indeed. I'm looking at the list of companies affected here. Dahabshil, of course, does stand out in that particular list, given the sheer scale of reach they have in Somalia. Isn't this just collective punishment?
Yeah, it's a collective punishment in one way or the other. The first is Dahabshil, not only Dahabshil, but other remittance companies has been suspended collectively, and there is no single remittance company that has been taken out the list. All of them has been punished collectively. And the second one I wanted to emphasize is that not only the hawalas who were benefiting, but the people at large who used to get that money. Imagine a family who used to cover the bills they receive from hawalas from their sons and daughters outside of the country, and in order to cover their expenses like food, education, and shelter has been stopped. So it is not only a collective punishment in terms of the companies like Dahabshil, but also they are punishing, poor people, poor Somalis, poor Kenyans and South Sudanese, and even greater Horn of Africa population who largely depend on money they receive from outside. It will have a dire consequence. It will have a devastating effect, and I'm sure they will reverse in the next few days this emotional decision that the Kenyan government has.
Indeed. One last question for you, Mr. Ahmed. To your knowledge, what course of action is being taken by the 13 firms put in that list in order to get this license suspension / cancellation overturned? Are they going to take legal action?
Can you hear me?
Just to repeat that question, Mr. Ahmed, to your knowledge, what exactly are these 13 companies that have been put in this list by the Kenyan government? What will they do next? Do they plan to sue the Kenyan government to get this order revoked?
Yeah, they have rejected because they were legally given licenses to operate in Kenya after Westgate attack. And they cannot imagine how after Garissa attack, their hawalas has been suspended. And second thing, the next action they will going to take is that they will transfer their money to another country which they feel safer and they can do their businesses like UAE or any other country similar to Kenya, which can help them do their businesses. So I can see those, and also you should know that Kenya itself will face similar problems Somalis will face, or more than that, because a card business, a narcotic leaflet who has been sent to Somalia to exchange millions of dollars will be stopped, because the only way Somalis used to pay that money is to send it through hawalas. So it is not only one way, it is a two-way problems, and I'm sure that Kenyan government will revert to this decision.
All right, well, lovely there for the time. Thank you very much for your input tonight, Mr. Ahmed. They're live from Mogadishu. We'll certainly keep tabs on that story. Worth pointing out to you, however, the Kenya Forex Bureau Association, of which these 13 suspended companies whose accounts are frozen are members, have put out a statement. And one of the arguments they're making here is that, and I'm quoting their statement here, the MRP's licenses were suspended without notice and without being given an opportunity to defend themselves. And that, of course, has greatly inconvenienced their clients. We'll keep tabs on that story for you right here on Global Business Africa. Let's move to South Africa now. The Zimbabwean head of state, Robert Gabriel Mugabe, he continues his visit to his southern neighbor. This is the first time he's been in South Africa in over 20 years. The two countries have signed a raft of agreements that aim to improve bilateral relations. Those include a boost in trade and the formation of a binational commission. Now, both leaders also spoke about bettering the lives of people right across Africa. They condemned the recent deadly attack in Kenya's town of Garissa.
The historic fraternal relations between our two countries necessitate that we work closely together for the betterment of the lives of our peoples, and also to promote sustainable development in our region and continent.
Look at the various ways of improving our systems on a joint basis economically. The guerrilla wars that we fought together were meant to yield systems of independent governments free from oppression, but equipped now with the means for self-determination.
Comments there from Mr. Mugabe and Mr. Zuma. Angela Coppola, of course, has been covering Mr. Mugabe's visit in South Africa in detail. He joins us now live from Johannesburg. Angela, these 5 deals, they cover customs administration, among other things, between the two countries. But let's zero in on that specific one. What benefits will that bring to both South Africa and Zimbabwe?
Well, the big news, according to President Zuma during his opening remarks, is that there is now a concerted drive to create a one-stop border post, and that's along all the border posts that separate South Africa and Zimbabwe. And it's been talked about for a while. It hasn't happened. It seems now that it's about to get kick-started, and it's probably going to happen. The issue really here is that we don't know any more detail other than the fact that this is essentially a drive to make the movement of people between the two countries a lot simpler. The details on any other aspects are probably only going to present themselves at a later date, but the timing is quite appropriate because South Africa is just finalizing the final ZSP applicants with the deadline that happened in December. So this one-stop border post is the big news. let's see how long it takes to happen though, Raman.
Indeed. One other story that we focused on quite a bit, especially last year, we spoke about the visa rules that South Africa put in place that essentially implied that about 250,000 plus Zimbabweans in South Africa will then have to go back home in order to reapply for visas and work permits. Now, did this issue come up at all in talks between these two sides?
Raman, interestingly enough, it didn't. In fact, the Home Affairs Minister in South Africa, Malusi Gigaba, wasn't even in the room. He hasn't been present at any of the discussions that have happened. However, President Mugabe did mention it in passing during his 45-minute opening remarks that he was saying there that Zimbabwe owed South Africa a debt of gratitude for being so accommodating in allowing the Zimbabweans who had crossed the border legally and illegally and allowing them to normalize their documentation. So there was a passing reference made to that. But other than that, there's been absolutely no discussion. We spoke to the Minister of International Relations yesterday, and she said movement of people between South Africa and Zimbabwe would come up for discussion, but she wouldn't go into any further detail. Raman?
Indeed. One final question for you, Angelo. Mr. Mugabe has argued there's no basis to portray Zimbabwe, and I'm quoting him here, as a begging bowl carrying country. Now, the fact of the matter is Zimbabwe's public finances are a bit shabby, and the country has sought loans from South Africa in the past. Is the issue of direct fiscal aid on the agenda between these two countries, and if not, why?
Well, let's just say that loans and direct fiscal support or aid weren't on the public agenda. I, in fact, spoke to the Zimbabwean Minister of Finance this afternoon, and he says they didn't come to South Africa to look for loans or fiscal aid. And he was emphatic about that. But he did say, and he made the point, and it was a pretty good point, that loans shouldn't be seen in a negative light. You can get loans anywhere, and depending on the state of the business or the country that you're from, the loans are priced differently. And he made the further point that businesses and countries apply for loans all the time. So he didn't say that they weren't looking for loans, but he did say that they weren't looking for fiscal aid. Raman?
Indeed, we'll have to leave it there for the time being. Thank you for that. That's Angelo Coppola live in Jersey for us. Let's make a quick run through the equity market, see what's going on across the board here for you. Another mixed bag of performance across the board. Gains in South Africa, gains in Egypt as well. But Nigeria, however, posting the largest losses on the day, down over 200 basis points at 34,175.24 in trading on Wednesday. Tour operators in Uganda are ticked off by travel advisories issued by Western states against the country. We'll bring their arguments to you next. Africa is on the move. It's into 7 of the world's 10 fastest growing economies. We help you make sense of the fast-changing African business landscape. We take you where the business is happening.
Global Business, weekdays at this time on CCTV Africa.
"19 minutes into the hour, you're watching Global Business Africa. Now, tourism officials in Uganda say travel advisories issued by foreign missions are hurting the country's industry. Tour operators in Uganda report that there has been a sharp and steady fall in the number of tourists who are coming in the recent weeks. Michael Beleke filed this report.
The impact of terror alerts and subsequent advisories is scaring away tourists from Uganda. Tour operators say business is slow.
A lot of people don't have jobs, people are closing their offices, they are selling off their vehicles, they don't know what to do next. And we don't see it happening, recovering very soon, because if you don't have bookings now for the next season, it means you might stay like this.
In March this year, the US mission in Kampala issued a terror alert warning of a possible attack on the capital. A number of alerts by government security agencies of an impending danger, especially in places of worship, schools and social places, have also been put out. Now some tour operators say growth rates in tourism may not hit the expected mark this year because of the alerts.
In 2013-14, we made a lot of money. We made over $1.4 billion in tourism, which we expected to double this time because all the players were determined at least double, triple it. But because of those challenges, they have affected the tourism business.
The tourism sector in Uganda employs about 800,000 workers. 80% of these are at risk of losing their jobs. Ugandan tour operators want foreign missions to be mindful of the impact of the alerts.
As you know, terrorism is a global event. It's not isolated to Uganda. As we talk, there's ISIS in Canada. As we talk, there are challenges in USA itself. So, and we cannot advise Ugandans not to go to USA for any reason. So it should be reciprocal in our understanding.
The misrepresentation of the Ebola outbreak in West Africa also caused a negative impact on Uganda's tourism sector, coupled with the anti-gay law that was later struck off by the courts of law. Tourism topped Uganda's foreign revenue earnings last year, but there is a worry this trend may not continue. Security agents maintain their responsibility is to provide a secure environment to everyone, and alerts could help. Michael Baleke, CCTV, Kampala.
Now, speaking of travel advisories, it's worth reminding you that the United Kingdom extended advisories against travelling to Kenya on the 27th of March. CCTV's Zhang He has more on that for us.
Well, the Foreign Office now advised Britons against all but necessary travel to within 15 kilometers of the coast from the Tana River down to Kivi. It is that all the British tourists currently in this area are advised to leave unless they have essential reasons to remain. It means the warning area extends from the coast of Kivi, just south of Mombasa, all the way up to the border with Somalia. The new warning indicates that only a small area of the coast are now safe to visit. The Foreign Office said there is a high threat from terrorism, including kidnapping, robberies and carjacking. They said the main threat comes from the extremists linked to Al-Shabaab, as we know that the group carried out attacks in Kenya in response to Kenya's military intervention in Somalia. At the moment, the Britons are still in a state of shock since Al-Shabaab militants stormed the Garissa University last week and slaughtered at least 148 people. It is also reminds them of the horrific Al-Shabaab attack on the Westgate Mall in Nairobi 2 years ago. As we know, the UK remains Kenya's biggest source for tourism market. The travel advice is a huge blow to the country's struggling tourist industry, which has been hurt by a series of attacks. Around 186,000 British citizens or nationals visited Kenya in 2012, but the numbers are reportedly to have fallen dramatically recently. It is feared that the latest attacks will also further dampen the interest from the UK tourists.
Quick run through commodity prices here for you. A barrel of oil will set you back for about $58 or so, and that's actually heading south. The big story, however, is actually in the M&A and the storage side of the commodity. Of course, news coming out earlier today, Shell buying out BG Gas, and that, from a historical perspective, what does point to essentially the culling of the week starting to gain momentum. The US rig count has almost dropped by half in the last 4 months as well. Let's see how much more pain, rather, American producers can certainly take before prices start heading back north steadily. Coming up next, Asian American businessmen are venturing out to mentor upcoming entrepreneurs. That story is coming up next.
Africa is not one country.
And Africa is not one story.
But as Africans, we do share one belief.
What's more offensive in a
that whatever the challenge, we will overcome.
CCTV Africa brings you unrivaled coverage.
From the fight against Ebola to the fight for greater freedom.
From the figures seeking your vote to the figures shaping your economy.
This is Guy Henderson reporting from the jungles of East.
And all the reasons to celebrate the diversity of life on this great continent.
Welcome back to the program. As the American economy continues to recover from the horrors unleashed by the 2008 Great Recession, more and more Americans are rolling the dice and taking the plunge to start up their own businesses. Asian Americans are certainly part of that group. Many of them are now turning to members of their own community for advice and a helping hand. CCTV's Hendrik Sibrandi reports from the U.S. state of Colorado.
Just south of Denver, Jay Zhang's Chinese restaurant Volcano is heating up. Since last fall, each month's revenues have been better than the last.
When we first started, it was pretty rocky, but after a while, we learned.
Wang Yiyang was just 18 years old when she started a hot pot business in Beijing. It didn't go well.
Now, I made a bunch of mistakes. I was keep hiring and firing people. I didn't know how to manage people, how to communicate.
The veteran businessman with lots of experience in the corporate world thinks he can help this young would-be entrepreneur. The two came together recently at a Colorado gathering of the National Association of Asian American Professionals.
You don't see that in any other.
These established business owners told those who'd like to be in their shoes someday that leaving a humdrum 9-to-5 job can pay off in the end.
If there's something else that you're passionate about, identify what the need is and then go do that thing.
Denver doesn't have the Asian American population of a Los Angeles, San Francisco, or New York, but its Asian American community is pretty tightly connected here and willing to help each other succeed.
The hibachi. It's time for me to give this back to the community, give to other newcomers. The mentorship is a wonderful thing.
Zhang is always ready with tips for those just starting out.
Know your customer base and know what they need. Know your employees. Do your homework. Believe in yourself. Because at the end of the day, you need to be motivated as a new entrepreneur.
If I'm bold enough.
Yang says the psychology of starting a new business is more imposing to her than the technical part.
It's more of how you overcome your fear.
She plans to build an investment firm in China and the U.S. and believes networking with fellow Asian Americans is easier and potentially more productive for her. She sees success in her future.
When you ask me, I'm definitely going to say yes.
This immigrant businessman who's been through the fire and has plenty to share is ready to help.
I see the hope.
Hendrik Sibrandi, CCTV, Centennial, Colorado.
Right, Forex. This is really much a story of two different perspectives. Look at the Kenyan shilling, for example. Relatively tight range today, but still very much on that southward trajectory. 92.70, 92.75 to the dollar at some point in trading today. It actually went a lot lower, but the central bank chipped in and sold some dollars in the markets. The Fed, in the meantime, members of the Open Markets Committee are split on whether or not to raise rates in June or to actually hold off until a little later. Right, here's what we're working on for tomorrow's program. 24 hours after Kenya essentially froze the accounts of Cash Remittance Bureau suspected to be backing Al-Shabaab insurgents, will be back in a sleigh where most of these affected operators at best to assess the impact of this crackdown. Business delegations from Zimbabwe and South Africa, they're expected to sign deals that should boost trade and cooperation between these two countries. We'll also be covering that in a lot of detail right here tomorrow. Thank you very much for watching this edition of Global Business Africa. As always, you can send your feedback to globalbusinessafrica@cctv.com. And of course, we're also on Facebook and Twitter. Feel free to share your comments over there as well. For now, though, see you in the next 23 hours. I'm Ramanyan.